There are certain words in the English language that carry imagery, emotion, and perhaps significance far greater than just an ordinary word on a page. For example, the word confidential. If you see that word stamped on the front of an envelope, it sparks something in you, doesn't it? Who wouldn't want to know what was inside? Or take the word magical. For me, that word triggers memories of experiences that were so out of the ordinary, so enjoyable that it would be hard to describe them with regular words. So we just say it was magical. Well, today we're going to talk about a word that stirs up a variety of ideas and images and emotions. Sometimes it seems like a scary word, but it is a word that has always been associated with what it means to be the people of God. In fact, the word is critical to the Jesus mission. And what is that word? Sacrifice. Now, whether you've been part of a church community all your life or this is your first church experience, the word sacrifice stirs up a variety of ideas and images, doesn't it? As kids, some of us learned Old Testament stories about sacrifice that were both intriguing and confusing. This week I heard the word thrown around in the sports world as coaches and commentators talked about players needing to sacrifice for the good of the team. Most honorably, the word sacrifice makes us think of the many men and women who served our nation and sacrificed their safety and at times their very lives for us all. There are many images the word invokes, but no matter what kind of imagery comes to mind, I bet we can all agree that stories about people sacrificing for the sake of others really move us. These stories are powerful. How many of you have seen the Disney Pixar movie Inside Out? Well, if not, you should. It truly is a creative masterpiece. The movie personifies emotions like joy, anger, and sadness, and each of these characters represent one of these emotions. And the movie paints a picture of how these emotions shape our lives. Now, the story centers on a young girl named Riley and demonstrates how joy and anger and sadness work together in her brain. Riley is going through her pre-adolescent years, and a lot is changing in her life. After a few challenging turns and difficult events, Riley's emotion, joy, finds herself in quite a pickle. You see, Joy and Riley's childhood imaginary friend, Bing Bong, they fall into a deep valley where memories cease to exist. And they need to find a way out or they themselves will face extinction. Here's what's at stake. If they don't find a way out of this valley, little 11-year-old Riley is going to live the rest of her life without Joy. Well, Joy and Bing Bong, they come up with a plan to get out of the valley. They find one of Riley's old toys and they try to ride it down a steep slope and up a ramp, hoping to generate enough momentum to make it out of the valley onto the plateau above. Now, after 2 failed attempts, Joy is losing hope. But Bing Bong encourages her to try just one more time, and as they launch off the ramp, Bing Bong knows that Joy's best shot at making it to the top is if the wagon that is carrying them is carrying less weight at the apex of the journey. So he bails out of the wagon. Now Joy is thrilled as she lands on the cliff above until she realizes that Bing Bong isn't with her. And peering over the edge into the valley, she watches him disappear from Riley's memory as he exclaims, "Go save Riley! Take her to the moon for me." It's just a cartoon. It's just a cartoon. But that scene, it gets me every time. Was anyone else weepy when you saw that in the theater? All the 5-year-olds sitting around me probably thought I was having a midlife crisis. But it's beautifully moving, is it not? But there's a question I want us to wrestle with this morning. Sure, we're moved by stories of sacrifice, but what is our actual response to stories of sacrifice? When we see a moving story of sacrifice, does it change us? Does it inspire us to a heroic act? Do we find ourselves moved to sacrifice for the good of others too? Or do we walk away thinking, that's not for me. I could never do that. What is our actual response to stories of sacrifice? Today we're continuing our series that's all about a 2-year initiative we're calling One. And one is about making God number one in our lives. It's about coming together as one church with one vision so that we can accomplish the one mission together. And this series is leading us towards what we're calling Commitment Sunday, next Sunday, February 28th, where we will join together to make God number one by making 2-year generosity commitments. Now remember, our primary goal for the One Initiative is to see everyone who calls community their church home make a clear declaration that God is number one in our lives. That's our primary goal, 100% participation. Because we know if each of us allows God to do His work in us, He will accomplish His mission through us. That mission, it has always been the driving force behind Community Christian Church for over 25 years. I mean, helping people find their way back to God is what we are about. But I'll let you in on a little secret. The only way this mission can be accomplished is if people like you and like me buy into it. And buying into it means embracing this idea of sacrifice. You see, being willing to sacrifice our time, our talents, and our financial resources is critical if we're going to see the Jesus mission accomplished, both locally here in Chicago and all around the world. As I said, sacrifice has always been part of what it means to be the people of God. Sacrifice was part of how the ancient Hebrew people related to God. Matter of fact, a sacrifice was part of many cultures in pre-Jesus times. I mean, animal sacrifice, it was seen as a way to appease the gods in many cultures, as people constantly lived in fear of making the gods angry. And no one really wants to make a god angry, right? But then comes this God who calls himself Yahweh, the one true God. And he flips this idea of sacrifice on its head. You see, in the Christmas story, we see this Yahweh God taking on flesh in the person of Jesus. And if we fast forward to Easter, we see this Jesus becoming the ultimate sacrifice for all of creation. I mean, in a world where most cultures were making sacrifices to appease the gods, we find the one true God becoming an ultimate sacrifice in order to redeem his rebellious creation. Jesus doesn't sacrifice another life. He gives up his own life, and he becomes the model of what sacrifice should look like for his followers going forward. Jesus' act, it demonstrates that no sacrifice is too great when it comes to helping people find their way back to God. If we turn to Mark 14 in the New Testament of our Bibles, we find another story of sacrifice, the story of a woman. It's a woman Jesus commended. Let's read it together. While he was in Bethany, reclining at the table in the home of Simon the leper, a woman came with an alabaster jar of very expensive perfume made of pure nard. She broke the jar and poured the perfume on his head. Now, some of those present were saying indignantly to one another, "Why this waste of perfume? It could have been sold for more than a year's wages and the money given to the poor," and they rebuked her harshly. "Leave her alone," said Jesus. "Why are you bothering her? She has done a beautiful thing to me. The poor you will always have with you, and you can help them anytime you want, but you will not always have me. She did what she could. She poured perfume on my body beforehand to prepare for my burial. Truly, I tell you, wherever the gospel is preached throughout the world, what she has done will also be told in memory of her." She has done a beautiful thing, Jesus says. I mean, what made her sacrifice so beautiful? Well, for one thing, her sacrifice displayed a beautiful commitment. I mean, she is all in when it comes to Jesus, holding nothing back. There is a totality to this woman's sacrifice. If we look back to verse 3, let's talk a little bit more about this alabaster jar filled with expensive perfume. I mean, the perfume was likely a family heirloom, something that had been passed down from generation to generation. And the perfume is a remarkable sacrifice in itself. But what really strikes me in this passage is the alabaster jar. This jar, made of a semi-precious translucent material, was a treasure in itself, most likely irreplaceable. And the truth is, she didn't need to break it. I mean, the perfume could have been poured out like it had been poured in. But her decision to sacrifice the jar along with the perfume, it demonstrates the totality of her commitment. She held nothing back when it came to honoring Jesus. You know, as we think about what it means to honor God, to make God number one, her example begs a question. Are there ways we need to break the jar rather than just pour out the perfume? Understand, totality, it's not about a dollar amount. It's about being all in our commitment to God. What it means for me to sacrifice is probably a different dollar amount than what it means for you to sacrifice. In fact, a couple months ago, I came across a story that reminded me of this. In the wake of the Paris terrorist attacks, a mosque in a small suburb of Austin, Texas, was vandalized. And when a young boy, 7-year-old Jack Swanson, and his mom, neither of whom are Muslim, when they heard about this hate crime, young Jack gathered the contents of his piggy bank, about $20, and he donated it to the mosque toward repairs. I mean, who knows, maybe even he broke his piggy bank to get the money out. Well, in response to this sacrificial act, the leader of the mosque said, Jack's $20 are worth $20 million to us. See, it's the totality of a sacrifice that moves us. It was the totality of the woman's sacrifice that moved Jesus. Through it, she demonstrated a beautiful commitment to him. As we think about what we will sacrifice for God, are there ways we need to break the jar rather than just pour out the perfume? Well, not only did this woman's sacrifice display a beautiful commitment, it also revealed a beautiful love. I mean, the woman's sacrifice, it was motivated by love. We do crazy things for love, don't we? I mean, Richard Gere, he climbed a fire escape. Adam Sandler sang on an airplane. John Cusack held a ridiculously large tape player over his head for probably 35 takes. I mean, we sacrifice dignity, pride, and all sense of decorum for love. Love calls for the grand gesture. And of course, no gesture was grander, no sacrifice greater than the one Jesus made for us. In Ephesians 5, the Apostle Paul writes, "Follow God's example, therefore, as dearly loved children, and walk in the way of love, just as Christ loved us and gave himself up for us as a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God." He gave himself up. I mean, he sacrificed himself for our sins. And why did he do it? For love. His sacrifice was motivated by love. His example challenges us. Will we follow him in this way of love? What will we sacrifice for him and his mission? Jesus is moved by this woman's sacrifice because he knows it is motivated by love, a beautiful love. And not only did she display a beautiful commitment, not only did her sacrifice reveal a beautiful love, it also left a beautiful legacy. This unnamed woman had no idea how far the impact of her sacrifice would spread. Yet here we are, 2,000 years later, still talking about her. I mean, Jesus said, wherever the gospel is preached throughout the world, what she has done will also be told in memory of her. Through her sacrifice, she left a beautiful legacy. What kind of legacy do you want to leave? I mean, what kind of legacy could we leave together? All throughout this series, we've been talking about how our primary goal for the One Initiative is to have 100% of community attenders make a clear declaration that God is number one in our lives. Understand, that's never happened before. Less than 50% getting involved is the typical response. But 100% is our primary goal because that's the kind of legacy we want to leave as a church. We want to be remembered as a church that was united as one. We want to leave a legacy that is every bit as beautiful as the woman Jesus commended. Now, sadly, the disciples, the other Christ followers in the room, they missed the beauty of what was happening right there before their eyes. They didn't respond well. I mean, we're told that they were indignant. When faced with this story of sacrifice, they weren't inspired to leave a legacy. They got mad. Now, we can't be too hard on them because I think many of us can relate. The idea of sacrifice can make us uncomfortable. So back to the question I posed at the beginning. What is our actual response to stories of sacrifice? What will our response be to this story of sacrifice? I mean, when we hear or see a story like this, does it change us? Does it inspire us to a heroic act? Do we find ourselves moved to sacrifice for the good of others too? Or do we find ourselves saying, that's not for me. I could never do that. Do we pull back in fear? Do we walk away angry or indignant? Let me share with you one last story of sacrifice. It's a powerful story from right here in our church. Here is the story of community attender Morgan Berry and her decision to do something beautiful.
Hi, my name is Morgan Berry, and I've been coming to Community East Aurora for 4 years. I found Community through my parents. My mom and my stepdad were looking for a bilingual campus, and they started going to East Aurora and invited me. The music was awesome. It was very relevant and new, something that was different than churches I'd been to before. The All In series was when I pretty much made the choice that, okay, I needed to be exactly that, like all in for this church, not only through volunteering, but also through my finances. And I started tithing. It was very challenging to make that commitment because I was so concerned, not having a full-time job that I wouldn't be able to do it, but I just kind of buckled down and tried to make it happen. Shortly after I started giving my monthly commitment, I got a better job. It was a full-time job, and it was almost double what I was making at my previous job. It was like totally a God thing. So I continued giving, and then shortly after that, about a year after that, I got another job, another full-time job that was making almost double what I was making at my previous. Now at this point, I don't really see it as like an obligation. It's more like, what I want to do. I want to give back because I've seen how it can change, my life. I was looking actually to buy a house in East Aurora. The summer of 2015, we found a place. I put down some money, and we were just waiting for a response from the bank for them to approve the loan. I got a call basically saying that I hadn't gotten approved. I got my money back like the middle of September, which was right before Celebration Generosity. And to me, that was kind of a sign that this money should go toward Celebration Generosity. I mean, giving it away felt really good because I know where it's going. I know who it's going to help. I've had such an opportunity to see firsthand how this changes lives. 2014, I had the opportunity to go to Haiti and see how our partnership with Compassion, like what it's doing there and how it's, such a blessing to these kids. I also got involved with Community 412 the middle of 2015 and got to see, how these relationships grow and how much these kids love it. I felt like it was the right thing to do. I felt like this was the year that I wanted to give my biggest offering. I mean, I'm very excited about the One Initiative. I think this is going to be a blessing. The thing that I love about this church is that the mission statement, this helping people find their way back to God, it's not just that. You can see through the structure and through the different programs that we have how we really care about people and how we really do, our desire is to help them find their way back to God. For a little while now, I've gotten comfortable in my giving, and I think that with the One Initiative, it's going to challenge me to give more. It's very easy to say, oh, I'll just give, my normal whatever amount it is. But I think, the One Initiative is going to be something that's going to transform community as a whole, and prayer and, really listening to what God wants me to do is going to be key. He has a plan. My responsibility is to use what I have and give what I have to His mission, and then He will do the rest. God is number one, and we are one on this mission.
As we prepare to make our commitments to Jesus next week during our One Commitment Sunday, our hope and our prayer is that every one of us will respond by deciding to do a beautiful thing, to make a beautiful commitment, saying, Jesus, I am all in. I will sacrifice for your sake and the sake of your mission. To act from a beautiful love, saying, Jesus, I will sacrifice because my love for you and your mission. To leave a beautiful legacy, saying, Jesus, I will sacrifice so that together with my brothers and sisters, we can help as many people as possible find their way back to God. Now, if you have a kid in Kid City or a student in Stuco, you probably know that this week our kids and students are going first as they make their commitments to the One Initiative. And I love that they're going first as we unite as one church across every age group to accomplish the Jesus mission together. And next week, it's our turn. As we look ahead to next week's Commitment Sunday, this card is an invitation to do a beautiful thing for Jesus. What will we sacrifice? What does it mean for each one of us to break the jar as we make God number one? As you take time over this next week to ask God what commitment He would have you make, I want to encourage you to not just ask, what should I give? But to take some time to reflect and consider this question. What am I not giving? That's a jar-breaking question. Are there ways I'm just pouring out the perfume when I could honor Jesus by breaking the jar? Now, there are 3 words we've been sharing with you throughout this series that can help us wrestle with that question. The first word is stretch. We've been encouraging one another to review our personal budgets and figure out how to stretch dollars in each category so that we can reallocate dollars from each category to the one category. This is a beginning step, an important step. But most of us can stretch without really sacrificing. The second word is our word of the day, sacrifice. Sacrificing involves asking, what am I not giving? Let's look more closely at each budget category, but this time, let's ask ourselves, what would it look like to make a sacrifice in this area? Ask yourself, do my spending habits in this area honor Jesus? Are my choices legit? If the Spirit of God within you gives you peace as you ask that question, thank God for His provision. But you may discover areas that need to be challenged. Would you consider sacrificing your spending in that area for the next 2 years in order to honor Jesus? But we don't have to stop there. We could break the jar. The third word is Spirit-led. Spirit-led is about taking a step of faith. Spirit-led is about hearing from God as to what He would have me give, even if right now I don't know where that amount will come from. Spirit-led is about making a commitment that I'm completely dependent on God to provide. Understand, our desire, our dream is to be the kind of church described in Acts 4. The kind of church where the whole congregation of believers was united as one heart, one mind. They didn't even claim ownership of their own possessions. No one said, that's mine, you can't have it. They shared everything. That kind of church changed the world. And we believe that God wants to change the world through our church too. 2,000 years ago, Jesus lived the most beautiful story of sacrifice the world has ever seen. He gave everything for us, a total sacrifice, all for love, all for you, all for me. What will our response to His story of sacrifice be? Next week, we have an opportunity to respond. Next week, we will join together to declare that God is number one in our lives by making our commitments to the One Initiative. Next week, as one church with one vision, we will accomplish the one mission together. It's an opportunity to do a beautiful thing for Jesus. Let's break the jar for Him.